So let's understand administration in the context of the mission of the church. So administration and the mission of the church. So before we can really have that understanding, what do we need? We need to understand what the mission of the church is, right? Mission of the church. If we were to ask that question, what is the mission of the church? What would we answer? Reach people for Jesus, okay? Is that it?
Foster growth as we reach.
Okay. What about care for the needs of the poor, the widows, the orphans? Yeah. What is the, it's good stuff, thanks. That's good stuff. So, is there a single purpose to the church? Okay. So, administration and mission. We are to present the essence of the faith and the fulfillment of the mission of the church by personal experience with God, by the preaching of His Word, and by becoming living examples of His love and grace. That would be a good example of understanding mission. But here's the reality of mission and administration and organization. The church does what it is. Okay? The nature of the church establishes the foundation for understanding the purpose of the church and its ministry and determines their direction and scope. So, how do you know what people believe? By what they do. By what they do. So the church does what it is. How do we know what the church values? By what they do. So that church that does solely a Sunday morning service that is dynamic but does no follow-up, what would you say one of their values is? Large events, congregational worship. We do Sunday mornings good here at Bethel. I think we do great Sunday mornings. But that's not a sole value for us. We do follow-up well also. We do care for needs well also. Also, we do, think about the focus that we have as a church. We do a food truck on Tuesdays, community dinner on Wednesdays, USDA food distribution on Thursdays, a clothing closet, we do free haircuts, we do kids on the go, we do multiple outreaches as a church. So it's not just the attractional events that we value. We value outreach also, don't we? The church does what it is. And then the church organizes what it does. The ministry of the church introduces strategies and processes that require the exercise of leadership and the development of the organization within the church. So we can say we value, we'll call this outreach. We value outreach. We can say that as a church, okay? But if there's nothing here of events, connecting, follow-up, if we don't have this element down here, we might say we value outreach, but do we really? I'm going to say no. Because if we haven't thought through, I don't have an eraser. Andy, you mind helping next one? Grab an eraser. If we don't have a structure underneath our values, then we have no system for completing tasks and completing values and vision as we have listed them out. We say we value something, but if we haven't thought through everything that matters with it, then we haven't really created a way for us working through that value. So it's like, I'll use children's ministry as a great example. We value in children's ministry first-time guests. We value first-time guests. Pastor Dan and Pastor Joel, our assistant children's pastors, they can show you the organizational flow chart that I have created on how we handle first-time guests. It's literally one of those flow charts there where you've got a box, then you've got the diamond. It's not a diamond. Yeah, I don't draw, I use computers. Where if you get yes/no statements, And then you've got this kind of thing going on throughout the entire flow chart where first time guest, make a phone call. Did they answer? Yes, you do this. No, you do this. Yes, it goes all the way through this until it's created a cycle that does one of these things where it goes all the way through this process 3 times before we stop trying to contact them. Before we stop trying to contact them. It's a structure, it's a process, it's a plan that we have. Why? Because we value first-time guests. We want them to feel connected. We want them to know that they matter. We want them to understand that they're important, and we want to communicate clearly with them. But if we say that we value something, but we don't put feet to it, do we really value it? I would say no. I would say no. It's like people that say, yes, I believe smoking causes cancer, but they continue to smoke. I would have to say they don't actually believe it. Because why would you continue to do something that you're pretty certain is going to kill you? I wouldn't. So how do you know what people believe? By what they do. So the church does what it is, and the church organizes what it does. If it's not organized, if it's not structured, I wouldn't say the church actually values it. So, what are the tasks of the church? How many brought a Bible to church administration? There you got an iPad, that's good enough. You need to bring an iPad, did you? Oh, you brought your phone. Okay. All right. So, somebody look up Matthew 28, verses 19 to 20. Unless you've got it memorized, in which case you need to share. There's Kayla with her.
How do those? Go therefore make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit. Teach them to observe all that I commanded, and I'll be with you until the end of the age.
Okay. Make disciples. Therefore preach, make disciples. Mark 16:15.
As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. That's the wrong word. Anyway, go on 15. He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation."
Okay. Preach. All right. Thank you.
I went to 5. That's the word. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why I'm reading this.
You worried me too. I'm like, did I have the wrong verse up there? Okay, so go and preach. Okay. Luke 24. 26 through 28, not 12 through 14.
Ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. And they drew nigh unto the village, whither they went, and he made as though he would have gone further.
You reading King James?
I don't know. This is Valencia, so whatever version she has.
Sounds like you did.
Gideon's?
Oh,
National?
okay, probably, yeah. Wow. Wow.
Something.
But what he taught scriptures. Taught the scriptures, okay. John 20, 21, yeah, we got there. We got, wow. That's all, that's always the interesting thing when you ask people to read is, everyone, it's when you, because, I grew up reading the New International Version, which I'm good with. But, there's more, I read the ESV more anymore, but I've had students read, the Message, and I'm like, okay, that's a little different. I like the Message. I like it, but I don't use it as a primary study tool, but I do like the Message. I dig Eugene Peterson in general. So, okay, John 20, 21.
Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I'm sending you."
Okay, so that was a good one.
I checked it about 4 times.
That's good. I'm proud of you. Acts 1:8.
But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, and all of Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth.
So when we talk about the task of the church, we already established that there's an element of caring for the widows, the orphans, the poor, the administration for the needy. These verses just line up for providing a commissioning of sending people out. for preaching. But here is the, if we talk about administration and mission, this is, these are the two core things I'm trying to get at as we understand this, which goes back to our initial understanding of what you do not measure, you will lose. What you do not manage, you cannot measure. What you do not measure, you will lose. Ultimately, missional engagement matters because it represents support of the vision, and administration makes execution possible. So, Walt Disney is a great example. Walt Disney was an incredible visionary. Okay, obviously Disneyland, Disney World, Mickey Mouse. We all love Mickey Mouse, right? Anybody afraid of Mickey Mouse? Okay, good. They think it's brilliant, but Walt was not able to manage money. He could not have accomplished what he did if it wasn't for his brother. His brother Roy is what allowed him to build Disney as he did, because Roy handled the money. Walt handled the vision. Roy handled the administration. And without him, Walt Disney would have strictly been a great idea person. Would have been a great idea person. If we think about Apple, so many people have lamented Tim Cook taking over as Apple, as CEO from Steve Jobs. But not everybody is Steve Jobs, are they? The difference between Tim Cook and Steve Jobs is that their management style is very different. Steve Jobs, I've read multiple, I haven't read his biography, but I've read a lot of articles on his management style, and they said one of the things that every employee was afraid of was ending up in an elevator with Steve Jobs, because he would start asking you what you were working on, and he would pick it apart, and so either people would avoid the elevator with him, or everyone would have a practice answer so that they could go through, because he was very, very direct, very focused on things. But he also led through, however you're going to phrase it, compartmentalization or silos. There was no cross collaboration in the organization. So when he died, the image of Apple was more like this, with Steve Jobs being right here in the middle. And he was the central hub. Everything focused on him. So when Apple faltered, when Steve Jobs died, it was because what was connecting all of the elements of Apple no longer existed. The way it was structured wasn't sufficient without that hub. So when Tim Cook has come in, he's had to establish a different structure. He's had to establish an organization that was interconnected, an organization that worked together. He had to establish a whole new company. And so people think that Apple is failing. I think the fact that they sold out of 4 million iPhones in like an hour might not be an indication that they're doing that bad. But he had to restructure. Why? Because the way things were structured before, everything hinged on one person. And so when we start talking about administration, Apple was poised for growth as long as Steve Jobs existed. But if you think of Microsoft as a difference, now, Microsoft is very rarely talked about in more favorable terms than Apple. But think about it in this sense. Bill Gates was able to step down as the founder, CEO, and go to his foundation of just distributing money to needs around the world. And Microsoft has still done okay. Two very different organizational structures. I mean, Microsoft is still Microsoft, and Steve Ballmer jacked them up even more than they were before. But they still exist. They've still continued to thrive without Bill Gates. as leader. Apple, on the other hand, everyone's, without Steve Jobs, Apple's going to die. Tim Cook's restructured, I think they're going to do fine. They're going to do okay. But as we talk about organization, administration, mission, task, it really, these things go to structure. They go to how do we set things up, how do we design things, how do we talk about things, how do we organize what we do. Because as we said, how do you know what people believe? By what they do. So if we as a church say we value people, how have we set ourselves up to demonstrate that we value people? How have we designed our organization to demonstrate that people matter? How have we taken what God has given us? Think about the parable of the talents. How have we taken what God has given us and put it to use appropriately for the kingdom? So in the parable of the talents, was the failing the fact that the guy only had one talent? No. The failing was the fact that he didn't do anything with it. That's the failing. Big or small is not the issue. It's how do we utilize the resources God has given us? How do we use what God has deemed us responsible for? How have we organized His church? How have we organized His church? You know, the Bible tells us that God will not put on us more than we can bear. And we often interpret that strictly in the sense of troubles, trials, and tribulations. But I think it flows also in the sense of blessings and opportunities. Why don't we have more? Because we don't know what we would do if we did. Because we're not prepared for it. We can't adequately minister to it. We can't set ourselves up for it. And this is the challenge that we have in ministry and administration and church growth structure. So coming back to the question that you asked, why more churches are focusing on administration, I think it's because their golden days are behind them. And they're starting to see an attrition rate that finally they have gotten a wake-up call that says, we have to do it differently or we're going to die. And if they had had the sense to think further out, they might not have ever experienced a crisis. We talk about it in Christian leadership like this. Every organization experiences a process. You know, you've got your birth, your growth, and this really, right, when you get up in this area, is when you're experiencing like the real glory days of the organization. And when you get to here, we have a choice. We can go three ways. We can go down, which a lot of churches decide to do. You might say, well, why would they decide to go down? Because they don't change how they do stuff. They just make that decision. You can plateau, which is just maintain, or you can start a new S-curve of going up. But all three of these things require different strengths. This requires doing nothing to change. This requires doing everything to stay the same. This requires new efforts to go in new directions. This is, in order for a healthy life cycle of an organization, this requires, when things are going good, to do something new to help things get better. But again, if you don't have any idea of where you're at, then there's no way for you to evaluate how you're doing. Administration helps you to evaluate that. So this last couple of weeks in our spiritual life team meeting, which is our pastoral staff and some key directors here at the church, we have set goals for the fall. And the first place that we started in setting our goals for the fall was what happened last year, so that we have a point of evaluation. We run a 12-month continuous evaluation of our attendance. So to see how are we doing this year as compared to last year, to see whether we're moving forward in success. But there's a lot of churches that they don't track attendance. They don't track the right thing. We track attendance, we track giving, we track number of volunteers involved in ministry. Why? Because it helps us to know how we're doing. And then we set goals of increasing those things. and how we're going to do it. How are we going to increase attendance? How are we going to help people give more? How are we going to help people come to church? Think about this summer. Summer is a traditional time that churches dip. They decline in attendance. At Bethel, we had over 300 first-time families attend this summer. How? Well, because we started in May pushing hard to be inviting people. But then we took it a step further. We didn't just say, you need to invite. We provided tools. We provided invite cards. We sent out multiple postcards to invite people. And we gave them incentive. Come to the after party with the pastors on Sunday the 14th if we reach this goal. We did several things. What was that? Was that just a hook? That was setting up a structure that helped to engage people in a task for the purpose of preaching the gospel. Preaching the gospel. See, these are things, so when we talk about structure, we talk about organization, we sometimes we can get bored. And trust me, some of the things that we're going to talk about, they're not exciting. Worrying about health insurance benefits for employees is not exciting. But providing quality benefits will dictate what kind of employee you will have. That makes it a little more exciting because it will help determine your missional engagement. So understand, administration makes execution of the vision and mission of the church possible. You know, I worked for a senior pastor that was a wonderful, wonderful motivator. Horrible, horrible organizer. He would say, he's a good guy. He would say, we're going to go here. And we'd all start together right here. But about here, when we were just kind of getting started, he'd decide we're going to go this way. And then he'd decide we're going to go this way. And then we go that way. And then maybe we go back this way. We never got to this point. Because he wouldn't allow structure. He wouldn't allow structure to take place. So what happened in that church? Well, he's still there. When he got to the church, they were running about 150. When I was on staff out there, we started at about 175. In the first 2 years I was there, we grew up to over 300. And then he changed his mind 3 or 4 times in the next 3 years, and we went back down about 150. Because he couldn't allow a structure to take place. So the advantage of administration is that it gives feet to the vision and mission of the organization. It gives direction to the vision and mission. It goes, vision says this is where we're going. Administration and management say this is how we're going to get there. So in missional engagement, administration has to go hand in hand. And here's the thing that we have to remember in setting up structures of administration and organization is that they must be complementary to the vision, not contrary. Too often administrators, and this was one of the challenges I've run into at previous church, is that the administrator was so adamant that you had to follow the correct processes and procedures and stuff, that even if the procedure was contrary to the direction we were trying to go into, if you didn't follow it, what you wanted wasn't going to happen. So we have to set up structures and processes that are conducive to completing the vision and mission of the church. This is the role that we do in administration. So, any questions about the first couple of segments there? Okay.